everybody. Ron Wildman here at Middle Georgia Spotlight. And we're talking to a friend of old, plus a friend of about everybody else in Middle Georgia, Liz Fabian. You know, I've just gotten rid of the Jarvis part of it after all these years.
I had somebody call me Liz Jarvis just the other day.
Yeah. Well, I saw the other day that you've put in a year on this job with Mercer University?
Right.
Explain this, collaborative. What does that mean?
Sure. My position is the Civic Reporting Senior Fellow for the Center for Collaborative Journalism.
My goodness.
Yes, it's a big mouthful, but back in 2012, we formed the Center for Collaborative Journalism with Mercer University, the Telegraph, and Georgia Public Broadcasting. And in recent years, 13 WMAZ has joined this collaborative. And what we do is that we pool our resources at times to work on specific issues in the community. And so it's just a way to kind of extend the reach of the journalism community because, as you know, the staff size has shrunk dramatically in a lot of these organizations since you were covering news. So there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of holes. So it's my job to kind of pick up the pieces and get into some of these meetings that haven't been covered like they used to be 10, 15 years ago.
Well, last time we talked was over a year ago. Life was good then. You were working at the Telegraph, floating along, and all of a sudden the Telegraph have had to shrink down. Yeah,
there's been a lot of downsizing since I joined the Telegraph, and that was just in 2003. When I joined, we had 4 people just paying attention to Macon Bibb government and Warner Robins Houston County. You know, we had 4 people covering that, and so now there's down to like 4 reporters left total, and they have some, extra folks who pitch in different capacities, and there's more sharing with the operations. So I mean, it really has shrunk so significantly, and even just the decisions that were made in terms of coverage. When you covered City Hall in the 70s, I mean, you were there all the time. I mean, you lived there practically, right? I mean, you were at City Hall.
Yes,
Life
was
good.
Yes.
You were in the hallways and learning things, and just the way the media is now, and just the staffing situations. If you have one major news story that's somewhere in Middle Georgia that might take, 2 or 3 people or whatever, and so you don't have folks left to sit in a meeting for all day because the county commission, I mean, they start every other Tuesday at 9 o'clock and can go to 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and that's a long investment for a reporter to be in a situation.
I was handling public relations or information with the city from 99 to 209, I think, and on some particular days, it could be 5 or 6 reporters calling me from the Telegraph alone, let alone the TV stations. But the Telegraph covered every aspect of those meetings and had specialists of it. And that continued up to back when, you mentioned earlier this not too long ago.
Right.
And then all of a sudden that coverage was disappearing. And when you got this job, I told you, Liz, I think you are the most important news person in the city, because you have to be the watchdog in effect.
Right.
And that's extremely important.
And if you notice, with the advent of COVID and everything being
on
online
top of
and Facebook and all of that, I mean, the public can see what happens in the general meeting. But as you and I know, most of the work is done outside of the regular commission meeting. It happens in the committee meetings. It happens, when people are brought in, they get their questions answered. And then when it comes time for the nighttime regular commission meeting, it's all pretty much said and done. And there's just a vote, and there's not as much talk or discussion or debate because it's already been done before. And it's really, in those other satellite meetings is really when you get a grip of the situation. And then there's cumulative issues too. There are a lot of times where I'm digging back 2 or 3 months to a meeting to answer questions about a current topic that's in the news that week, just because of how the process works.
We work together over at Channel 24, and being a TV news reporter is real exciting. I mean, I love the job, and I know you did too. Now, this is a lot different. You don't have these stand-ups. You don't have this exciting video out in the field. How are you taking to this?
Well, it's difficult at times, when there's a major storm coming, or I remember one day I was sitting in my office and we had just such a flooding rain, and I was feeling bad that I wasn't out in it, but then all of a sudden I thought, well, I'm dry. I'm not wet, I'm not out in the middle of traffic or whatever, but there is still an urging, I think, to do that kind of live reporting and all of that I have enjoyed throughout my career. But like you said, this is an important mission to keep the community connected. And it's not just the Macon-Bibb County Commission, but one of the first things I did when I got on staff here was just look up all of the local boards and authorities that have people appointed by the mayor or by the commission, and there's more than 40 of them.
That's right.
And so I try to keep my fingers in all of those just to have that continuity.
Well, in TV news, we'd pick out a story and go out and get it and then leave, and we could go do 4 or 5 things a day if need be.
Right.
But covering the meetings the way you do now, you try to blast them out, stay with them all the way.
I do. I just kind of, I stayed the whole time. And even now with COVID, since so many of them are on Zoom or another place, I've got to set up so if I have 2 meetings at the same time, I can monitor one live and then I can record the other one so that I can listen and make sure I didn't miss anything from there. So
Kind of like multitasking.
multitasking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Every time I go into Milledgeville, my grandson works up there now, and he went to school up there. I go past the aircraft factory there.
Right.
And I think of your family.
Yes.
Y'all were from New York.
Long Island, New York. Right.
Back when? When did you move down
We
there?
moved in the mid-'70s. My dad worked with Grauman Aerospace on Long Island, and they were building a plant in Milledgeville. So they were asking some of the people who had worked on Long Island if they wanted to have a new adventure in Georgia. And so my parents came down, and in New York, the population is so dense. And we lived out on the island. It was a very beautiful community and all of that in the suburbs. But the parents would always talk about retiring to upstate New York, where there's all that rolling land and hills and mountains and countryside. And when they came down to Georgia, they really just fell in love with it. And so it was a great opportunity. And so here we came.
That it wasn't easy. Tragedy struck soon.
Yes, my father died just 7 months after we moved down, and that was, just an immediate, just drop dead of a heart attack. Long before the days of heroic measures to be able to save, and he was like the typical working man who didn't do regular checkups and all of that. In fact, Grumman instituted a kind of a management policy where everybody needed to have their checkups because, knowing what was going on with his heart in the postmortem, it would have been something that could have been dealt with had it been, found. I mean, nowadays, of course, with the bypass surgeries and all of that. So
then Mom Peggy had to make a big decision.
I remember we sat around the kitchen table, shortly afterwards, and she asked my brother, who's 4 years older than I, and he was in college and I was in high school, and she wanted to know, well, do we want to go back? Because we had only been in town for 7 months, but in that 7 months, we really put roots down early. I think I cried all the way down the interstate from New York to Georgia pretty much because, I was in high school. I was leaving all my friends, and it was a difficult time to move as a teenager, but I got into a great group of friends at Georgia Military College. My brother was entrenched at Georgia College, and so we just decided to hang in, and I'm really glad I did.
So you, Georgia Military College, you went to the school.
Went to the high school.
High school.
Right.
And then after that, what did you do?
I got a scholarship to Georgia College and State University now, or Georgia, back to Georgia College. And so I stayed at Georgia College and, had thought that I wanted to go into acting and drama and all of that because I enjoyed that so much. But I started working for the radio station while I was in school, and then they were starting up a journalism program, and I got to take a couple of journalism courses and then just decided on that career path and really haven't looked back.
How did you get into TV news?
Well, I had an audition tape, because we had just started a studio there at Georgia College, and so I cut my first audition tape, and Channel 24 was just opening up, and so they were, hiring all new people, and so I had my little resume tape in hand, and I went over to Channel 24, and they had a news director who preceded you actually over there, and he said I didn't have any experience and that I needed to get some experience and come back. And I said, well, how am I going to get experience if people say I don't have experience and can't get a job? So I had some extra time, and I just drove out to Channel 41 on the Cochrane Short route, and somebody had left that Friday. And I was there Monday. They had me back Tuesday for an audition, and I got the job. So that's kind of how I wound up. And I had also done an interview in Milledgeville with one of the radio stations, and they were kind of like on hold. I mean, they had sort of offered me a job, but I really wanted to try the television aspect of it because I had that theater background, and I wasn't shy of being in front of cameras or anything like that. So it was a nice melding of everything. And
Not too long after you were at 41, they did something unusual. They were going to get out of the news business. You had to start looking for another job.
Well, what happened was they slashed the staff. And at that point, we were going head to head with Channel 13 in terms of, we had the morning cut-ins during the morning programming on the Today Show, and then we had a noon show, and then we had the 6 o'clock, and we had the 11 o'clock. And they decided to lay off more than half of the news staff and keep 3 people. They kept the news director, they kept the sports guy, and they kept me. And the 3 of us, we kind of held down the fort, and they took CNN headline news at 11 o'clock, and the first block, which was about 7 minutes long, was our local news block. So that's all we had at that point. And we were rotating schedules, so one week I would report, one week I would anchor the evening show, and then the next week I would do the morning show and then report. So, and during that time, I spent a lot of time at the City Hall, and then you had an opening, and the rest is history. You got me over there to Channel 24, and then just kind of went on from there.
And in between that, you went to the Weather Channel.
I did.
Tell us, how'd that come about? Because you're not a meteorologist.
No, I wasn't. But my first job at Channel 41 was co-anchoring and doing the weather. Because back then, in the 80s and late 70s, it seemed like whoever was the female on set,
The weather girl.
also was the weather girl. So yeah, I had no experience or anything with the weather, but they said, you didn't really need that. You just follow the symbols on the map. And back then, the symbols, it was just a green screen, but it was the magnetic paint. Yeah. So we had these little magnetic strips, we could put the fronts on there, whatever, and then we had there were 2 boards, and you pulled one across that had the state, and the other one had the whole United States on there. And I remember pulling it across, and all my numbers fell down because it just kind of got too close to the edge, and it was like, oh, temperatures are dropping in Macon. But it's just kind of those early days of TV. And then the Weather Channel, one of our former colleagues, Rebecca Irwin, who was the meteorologist at Channel 24 for you, she left and went to the Weather Channel. And so she was back for a going away party for one of the other staff members that we worked with, and she told me that they were hiring, that they wanted to have news anchors kind of who could anchor those shows on the Weather Channel, because at the time, the meteorologists were working 4 10-hour days. So if you tuned in on Monday, you saw somebody different than you would on Friday. And with that morning television, everybody pretty much, they're getting up, going to work, so they turn on the TV at whatever time. And so they wanted some sort of continuity, and they were looking for news people primarily. And it was odd because of all the people that interviewed and applied from all over the country, they hired 2 people that were already on staff at the Weather Channel, and they hired 2 people from outside. And it happened to be me and Dave Nemeth, who was an anchor at Channel 24 before I got to 24. But, we knew each other and stuff, so it was funny, all the roads. He had gone to Hartford and was working for PM Magazine or something, and then so, we were reunited at the Weather Channel.
I recall one time, 5 people who have gone through our newsroom at 24 were at the Weather Channel at the same time.
Right.
And I remember you pioneered some of this storm coverage back then. I remember you on barnstorming trip during a hurricane,
That's right.
going down the southern rim around to Texas.
Yep, I sure did. And it was Hurricane Gilbert back in 1988, I believe. And it was a monster Category 5 storm as it came across. And we left Atlanta in the big blue, it was called Blue Thunder. It was this Suburban that, back in the early days of Suburbans where there was not much cushion in the back seat or anything.
Yeah.
And I was like bouncing around from Mobile all the way down to Brownsville, Texas, which is as far as you can go. And that storm actually made landfall in Mexico. So we kind of, as bad as it was, I mean, it was still pretty bad in southern Texas, but it didn't hit any of the big population centers that they were afraid it could have
And I
at the
recall
time.
watching that coverage. You go so far and do a report, go so far and do another report, all the way down there.
And early on, before we hooked up with the satellite truck, because we used WXIA's satellite truck out of Atlanta once we got down into Texas. But on the way down there, when I stopped in Gulfport and I did a, look live kind of report, we had to mail the tape back. We had to take the tape to the post office and mail it back because there wasn't any of that kind of transmission devices back then, unless you had the satellite truck, and we didn't piggyback until we got to Houston. So
Immediate news.
That's
Well, as
right.
immediate as we could get at that
Yes.
time. Yeah. The getting back to your current job here at Mercer and the Telegraph, WMAZ, and Georgia Public Television. You say because of the staffs are smaller now,
Right.
You need to group up together.
You're seeing a lot of more collaboration all across the board. I mean, there's always been the network affiliate. Let's say if it's, ABC 16, then you have the resources of ABC News, perhaps, and we could share feeds from all over the country so that, again, you could get via satellite footage from Texas or something if you needed it for your evening newscast to do a national wrap or whatever. So now we are partnering on a project every year, and this one we're doing the cost of COVID. We're just started that in the past month. And so what we're doing is that rather than each of us go out and cover the same story and have different versions of it, then we can cover so many more stories because we're sharing the content. And everything that I do is published on the Center for Collaborative Journalism website, which is macon-newsroom.com. So everything I do is published on that, but it's also shared with the Telegraph. A lot of my work shows up in the paper. And then WMAZ, I mean, every once in a while you'll hear them make reference to, from our partner at the Center for Collaborative Journalism is reporting something, and then Georgia Public Broadcasting, most of my stories wind up on their website as well. And back before COVID, we were doing kind of weekly chats about what was going on in Macon government that we could talk to for the radio audience. And then, with our partnership with WMAZ, I was one of the panelists for the mayoral debate. So, I mean, we're having that kind of symbiotic relationship. We're all kind of working together. They know that I'll be at the Macon Bid Planning and Zoning meeting, so they don't have to send somebody. If there's an item that they're interested in, they can call me, or when I file my report, they'll see what was reported there, so that they don't have to devote a resource there.
Your bulletin the other day got my attention.
Culver's?
Butterburgers.
Butterburgers, that's right.
I was in Ohio with my sister driving around, and I saw this sign, Butterburgers. I did a U-turn.
Yeah, but what about the frozen custard?
Oh, everybody talks about that. That's the big thing. They ought to be advertising that more than the Butterburgers, but everything they have is good.
And I guess we should let folks know that it's the Culver's that's going to move into the old Metro Diner location there on Northside Drive by Tom Hill.
I love that place.
Right there.
I hated to see that go out of
Yeah,
business.
that was a surprise because any time I had been there was a wait and there was a lot of people in there. So I don't know really what happened with
Was that a planning
place.
and zoning story, or where were you?
Yeah, that was a planning and zoning story, and it was one of those situations where it almost kind of flew under the radar because the reason it had to go to the commission because they wanted to put a covered parking area on the side that had solar panels. And so sometimes, things just come through planning and zoning and they don't really have to have a hearing for them. But that one, because of that, they wanted to kind of make it public just in case anybody in the area, Ortho Georgia complex there, might have had an objection or anything. They wanted to give them the opportunity to have a say-so on that. So when I kind of looked through all the papers, and I was like, oh, Culver's Restaurant. And so I started looking up and finding about that. But every once in a while you just get like a little nugget there and like, oh, that would be exciting.
This group you work with, this team, it's not just one or two people. Name some of the folks.
Well, Amir Makeup-son, who was an anchor on
24.
WGXA for a long time, and she is the coordinator here. She's the news director at WMUB here, and so she works with the students, but she's also the liaison broadcast reporter with WMAZ. So she has weekly reports on WMAZ. There's also veteran journalist Debbie Blankenship, who's our director here at the Center for Collaborative Journalism, had written for the paper for a long, long time, and then she also worked with Congressman Marshall and has since been at the Center for Collaborative Journalism, for probably 5, 6, 7 years or more, and now she is the director of the whole thing. So we have her. We also have Nicole Bailey Coven, who was also a veteran of Channel 41 years ago, and so she is working to coordinate with everyone. She is also a reporter doing her own stories, but she is kind of the coordinator that takes the student stories and my stories and others and shares them around with the partners and kind of coordinates and keeps us all online when we have our meetings and how we're proceeding with different projects we have.
These are historic times at the Government Center, the old City Hall. We got a new administration in there, Mayor-elect Miller.
Right.
What's going to happen? What do you see?
Well, it's just an interesting time. And back when I was mentioning the fact that we have about 4 dozen boards and authorities that all have appointments from the mayor, or they get some sort of percentage of tax dollars and those kinds of things. So when I started looking at that, and I had gone to an age-friendly advisory council that has to do with our AARP status as an age-friendly community, and we were just, the meeting was going on and they were talking about the election, and they were like, oh, wow, you mean, a new mayor coming in will have carte blanche, can, start appointing people. So they were kind of wondering how that would affect. And each and every time, it's not so much like when you change presidents and you have all these new cabinet members coming in. Of course, Mayor-elect Miller will bring in his own staff, I'm sure, but, some of these other boards won't be changing until somebody's time is up on there. You'll start have a gradual, somebody may have a different focus coming into office than the predecessor. Mayor Rickert was very strong on the 2nd Street corridor, and there's still, in fact, just last night at the commission meeting, they were talking about, kind of planning for the whole Mid-City Square, which is a step beyond, into the western section of downtown. And, so there's still kind of wheels going with that, but, it just kind of remains to be seen what's going to happen. Plus we have, several new commissioners that are starting. We're going to be saying goodbye to Commissioner Larry Schlesinger and Bert Bivens and Joe Allen, some of these longtime fixtures that have been around in our political landscape. And so we'll have new people coming on board as well.
Plus, Lester's a son of South Macon and grew up down in there, and a lot of problems down there that need to be addressed. And I imagine there'd be a lot of thought towards that from him.
There's a lot going on, and so and he and some of the others who have been elected to the commission are also coming in and kind of shadowing at these meetings, just kind of paying attention to what's going on, so that when they hit the ground running in January, they're not kind of clueless as to what's going on. So that's good to see.
Named a big transition team the other day.
Yes.
Were you there?
Did. No, I wasn't. And see, that's another kind of interesting thing about my job, is that if the partners are covering it, if it's something that's already kind of, like if the Telegraph is planning to do a story on it or something, then I don't really have to duplicate that. Really, my niche
But you possibly could have been there.
I could have been. But I mean, if, it's for, to try to find those things that other people haven't. I mean, I'll just give you an example. The pension board meets every month, and there's different pension categories. Back from, we had county commission, we had like the county workers and then city of Macon workers, and then there was consolidation, and then there's police and fire that operated on a different system for a long time because they weren't, taking out Social Security for them. It was all going to be in, pension and such. But there's been a little issue that the auditor found in terms of using a multiplier for those benefits. And the auditor was saying that she believes that they were using the wrong multiplier for a number of years. But that's something, nobody really goes to those pension meetings, but me now, So, I was kind of listening, and I couldn't get anybody from the county yet to talk about it because they still don't know what the situation was. But I thought it was important to let these retirees know that there might be extra money coming to them. And it had something to do with if you chose a non-standard benefit, like for a spouse survivorship or something like that. So, and all of the records are not digitized. They're in paper files.
Oh my.
So, I thought that, if people knew, then they could say, oh, well, I'm one of those who had that non-standard. So it's just like little things like that you can find by being in the meetings all of the time.
Following through and keeping it together. Those pension board meetings over the years have been real hot items, believe
Right.
me.
Yes.
I was there for a few of them. So what do you see as the future now for maybe the media business? Nationally, we've been lucky here. It's been kind of okay, but nationally, the media, I think, is kind of a mess.
Well, I watch different channels, and I wind up talking sternly to my television very many times because you have anchors and they'll just interject their opinion, or they'll, and it's acceptable, whereas it wasn't. If you and I were anchoring the news, we wouldn't say, oh, that's a stupid proposal, or, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or whatever. But, you just read their demeanor sometimes. And, to me, it's like journalism. You just present the facts. You don't try to sway somebody one way or another, or, ask harder questions of one politician than you would another. Or, I've always been down the middle, even when it came to doing a freeze frame of somebody's, you don't want to make somebody look mean or look straight. You try to find a pleasing picture of them, at least in my way of thinking, because you don't want to make somebody look very stern and then somebody else with a big smile, because it's important. Do you remember when they altered the complexion of O.J. Simpson?
Yes.
On one of the magazines? It's those kinds of things that the public may not realize, but you and I do. Because you see it more than you would.
I grew up under Bill Tribble over at WMAZ. Bill was not a colorful person, but he was strict on being fair to people.
Right.
And you can't shake that. And no matter all those years I was out there, I'd hear Bill over my shoulder. And I tried to stress that when you all came over.
Well, and it's something as simple as when I started doing social media for the Telegraph, and if you linked a story on Facebook, you would only get one of the pictures. Like, say, if you had two mugshots, we call them, of people's faces, however you put it on there, it would only show one of them. So I always made sure I made a composite photo of both candidates so that you wouldn't just see one person's picture, you'd see both of them.
That's right.
And it sounds kind of silly almost, but I think it's important.
Old-fashioned.
When you go with that, right? I used to, make sure somebody had a minute 30 and a minute 30, not 2 minutes
That's
and
right.
a minute.
Second. That's
Just
right.
to be fair.
Yeah, well, it's not that way anymore.
It's.
Well, we're out of time.
Oh, are we really? Wow.
Thank you, Liz, for
You're welcome.
coming over, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Ron Wildman here at WMUB TV.